In 1968, North Korean commandos had the mission to the South Korean president. However, when they were less than 100 meters away from their target, they were discovered. South and North Korea fought each other during the Korean War in the early 1950s, which ended with an armistice and not with a peace treaty. A decade later, in 1966, the North Korean leader Kim Il-sung believed that if they attacked American personnel inside South Korea, combined with the American involvement in the Vietnam War, this may lead to the US then abandoning South Korea. This would eventually clear the way for a communist rebellion to take over South Korea. Kim Il-sung's beliefs led to a low-intensity conflict, which would later be known as the Second Korean War, or the Korean Demilitarized Zone conflict. In the middle of this conflict, on January 17, 1968, North Korean commandos infiltrated the DMZ between the two countries. Their goal was to raid the Blue House, which is the name for the South Korean presidential residence. The members of this North Korean commando team were part of Unit 124, a unit raised specifically in 1966 with one goal: to assassinate the South Korean president Park Chung-hee. Men who were picked for Unit 124 underwent a hardcore training regimen for almost 2 years to prepare them for the daunting task ahead of them. Training for Unit 124 included a focus on infiltration via air, sea, land, as well as hand-to-hand combat and more. Recruits were made to run at a minimal speed of 8 miles per hour while wearing 66 pounds of gear over broken terrain. Their training even included shooting and stabbing each other, and some men lost toes or entire feet due to frostbite on their training exercises. In the final days before heading out to South Korea, they even practiced their attack on the Blue House on a full-scale mock-up of the Blue House in North Korea. On January 17th, late at night, the 31 hand-picked commandos from Unit 124 crossed over the Korean DMZ in the area of the U.S. Army 2nd Infantry Division. Early in the morning on the 18th, 4 brothers are out cutting firewood as they stumble upon Unit 124's camp. According to a survivor, one of the commandos was wearing his South Korean Army insignia upside down, which then led the brothers to ask them if they were actually from the North, as South Korean civilians have been warned to expect North Korean infiltrators. So the men from Unit 124 confirmed that they are indeed infiltrators. However, they're trying to indoctrinate these South Korean civilians by telling them that they're on this important mission to bring communism to South Korea and liberate it from the US imperialist rule. The leader of the North Korean commandos promises these South Koreans high-ranking positions in a future South Korean communist government as long as they don't tell anyone about the mission. Whether the men from Unit 124 actually believed that their indoctrination lesson would actually take hold, or whether they realized that dispatching of these civilians and then burying them in the frozen ground would be nigh impossible, they let them go in the end, making these brothers promise they would not go to the South Korean authorities. So as Unit 124 marches off to the Blue House, the South Korean brothers run off the hill and immediately notified the South Korean authorities, who send out search parties, but however, due to the Unit 124's training regimen, they outmarch and outpace anything that the South Korean authorities could have held possible. The members of Unit 124 end up regrouping at, my apologies for the name about the butcher, the Temple Sung-sa for their final stretch to the Blue House. Now, there are conflicting reports as to what exactly went down as Unit 124 made their way to the Blue House. However, this series of events seems to be substantiated by the most sources. As the men from Unit 124 got to the final checkpoint, not even a few hundred feet from the Blue House, they were stopped. They were stopped by Deputy Commissioner Choi and Sergeant Jung. Stopped by these police officers, the leader of Unit 124 says that they are a unit returning from patrol. However, the deputy commissioner doesn't believe this. He says that he demands to see their IDs and takes out his sidearm. At this point, the men from Unit 124 open fire right in the middle of Seoul, striking both the police officers, and a massive firefight erupts right next to the Blue House. Though the commandos of Unit 124 seem to initially have the element of surprise and are able to overwhelm the defenders near the Blue House, reinforced defensive positions as well as a South Korean armored vehicle seem to make the final push impossible. At a certain point during the firefight, a bus makes its way towards Unit 124. They engage it, assuming these are South Korean security personnel arriving to reinforce. However, after the battle is over, it turns out this was just a regular bus carrying civilians, and multiple on board are killed or injured in the gunfight. After taking some casualties, the leader of Unit 124 sees the futility in trying to push any further and calls a general retreat to the hills just north of the Blue House. This retreat now turns into a massive scramble as all the surviving members of Unit 124 are trying to make their way back across the DMZ to flee back into North Korea. Between the hunt on the remaining members of Unit 124 and the actual attack on the Blue House, 26 South Koreans and 4 Americans are fatally wounded. A further 66 are left injured, which includes civilians, military, and police personnel. The hunt for the remaining members of Unit 124 lasted until the 29th of January, with some of them being able to avoid authorities for over a week after their failed attack on Seoul. At the checkpoint where the police officers were engaged, one wounded member of Unit 124 is found. However, he manages to take his own life before being able to be interrogated. Of the 31 men of Unit 124 who went into South Korea, 29 of them end up being eliminated in either the attack on the Blue House or the following pursuit. One of them surrenders to South Korean forces, and one of them does actually successfully make it back to North Korea. Park Ye-kyung, again apologizing for my horrible Korean pronunciation, went on to become a hero in North Korea. He received a hero's welcome back in North Korea even though the raid failed, becoming a general in the North Korean army, as well as occupying varying high-ranking roles in the North Korean government. He actually went back to South Korea multiple times in an official capacity as part of his role in the government, where he ironically, though probably with some North Korean intent, met with South Korean presidents on multiple occasions. The one member of Unit 124 who surrendered, his name is Shin-jo, said to his captors that he didn't want to die for nothing if the mission to go and assassinate the South Korean president was never going to be a success. In multiple interviews, he's claimed he actually never fired his weapons, something which seems to be corroborated by South Korean investigators. The interrogation of Shin-jo lasts for almost a year, though he's then basically cleared, and they release him into South Korea and make him a citizen not much later. However, his direct family is punished fatally for his transgressions against the North Korean regime, and even his non-direct family is all purged from North Korean society. So now I know the basic story of the Blue House raid. However, there's a reason as to why it happened, and specifically when it happened. In the late 1960s, the US is heavily engaged in the Vietnam War, and North Korean leadership believes that the US is not capable of supporting both a conflict in Vietnam and a conflict to protect South Korea against any North Korean attacks. To put into perspective just how much more the US was now involved in the Vietnam War compared to before, between 1966 and 67, which is 1 to 2 years before the Blue House raid, the US had 17,000 casualties in Vietnam. This is 8 times more than the almost preceding decade worth of casualties. The North Korean leadership figured that if they are able to remove the South Korean president, especially during a time where the US is super busy in Vietnam, this will clear the way for the South Korean people to rise up against their own South Korean government and the American imperialists. Whether planned or not by North Korean leadership, the Blue House raid happens just days before the start of the Vietnamese Tet Offensive, which obviously meant the Americans had their hands full in Vietnam. Finally, the USS Pueblo incident happens on the 23rd of January. The USS Pueblo is a research ship that ends up being captured by the North Korean Navy. This happens right in the middle of the hunt for the remaining members of Unit 124 back in South Korea. This means that North Korea now has about 80 Americans held captive, which is going to make the US think twice before taking any harsh steps as retaliation for the Blue House raid. Though it's over 50 years ago that the Blue House raid events happened, there are still things in Seoul that remind people of that every day. Deputy Commissioner Choi and Sergeant Jong's last line of defense right before the Blue House has not been forgotten. Initially, only Choi received a statue, but for the 50th anniversary of the attacks, also Sergeant Jong has now received a bust right at the checkpoint where they laid down their lives to protect the Blue House. Furthermore, there's still a tree that marks the bullet holes from an engagement of the night of the actual Blue House raid itself. As you can see on this map, the so-called January 21st tree isn't that far north of the Blue House, and is proof of the gun battle that happened between escaping North Korean commandos and South Korean security troops just outside of the presidential palace. So as mentioned earlier, right before they set off on their mission, members of Unit 124 actually trained their assault on the Blue House on a full-scale mock-up inside North Korea. Though there isn't any footage or proof of that, in more recent years, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has actually had multiple of these mock-ups of the Blue House built, and they've been used in multiple exercises, most likely similar as to what the members of Unit 124 did back in the 1960s. If you thought that was a crazy or daring mission with a very low chance of success, just wait until you hear about the South Korean version, where they attempted to do the exact same thing as revenge for the Blue House raid to try to capture or kill North Korean leader Kim Il-sung. However, we'll take a look at that in a future video. For now, if you have any cool suggestions for potential topics you'd like us to take a look at, let them know down in the comments. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you in the next one.